welcome everybody on the call and on the Learning Lab. My name is Annie Holmes. I work with the STRIVE Research Consortium based at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. This webinar, along with our previous 40-something other learning labs, are available on our website as videos of the slides and audio, and also as PDFs of the slides. So we invite you to look back and review the ones we've had before. I think there's quite an interesting selection for people to use in all sorts of different ways. Today's Learning Lab is co-hosted by STRIVE and AVAC. So thanks very much to AVAC for joining with us and to Rebekah Webb for doing this presentation today. Rebekah is, as you will have read in the invitation, Rebekah is an HIV prevention research advocate. She's based in the UK but has worked globally, particularly looking at prevention options for women, including through the global campaign for Microbicides, and now with AVAC, with the European AIDS Treatment Group, and in the UK with STOPAIDS. So Rebekah, over to you, and thanks again.
Thank you very much, Annie, for the invitation to speak to you as part of the excellent STRIVE webinar series. I'm very honoured. It's my job today to share with you what we know about the Dapivirine ring, a new method of HIV protection for women that's still in development. Just as a quick disclaimer, I'm not a scientist or a physician. I'm speaking from the perspective of an independent HIV prevention advocate trained in social science. So I do have perhaps the freedom to be a little provocative and share ideas that I hope will be thought-provoking and prompt us to think outside the usual boxes. So what is the Dapivirine ring? The Dapivirine ring is a flexible ring made of silicone that's designed to sit at the top of the vagina around the cervix. It looks a bit solid in the photo, but it can be easily squashed for insertion and bounces back into shape. The ring contains Dapivirine, which is a potent type of antiretroviral drug known as a non-nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitor, or NNRTI. It works against HIV by blocking its ability to make copies of itself once inside a healthy cell. The ring is made of a material that allows Dapivirine to slowly release over 4 weeks. Over the past 4 years, 2 large-scale studies have been looking at whether this vaginal ring could offer HIV protection to women. One was the ring study, led by the International Partnership for Microbicides, and the other was the Aspire study, led by the Microbicides Trial Network. Because 2 phase 3 trials are usually required for regulatory approval, the trials were carried out simultaneously so that if effectiveness was found, there would be a basis to move forward into implementation without delay. In February 2016, we learned that the ring did indeed provide protection, albeit at a modest level. As it shows on the slide, the IPM ring study found a level of 31% protection overall, and the Aspire study a level of 27%. Now, this may not sound like very much, but it demonstrates clear proof of concept, and as we'll see in the next slide, the true picture may be much better than this overall headline figure tells us. So this slide shows you the 2 trials side by side with some key data. If we go straight to the section on results, about halfway down, you'll see that Aspire did a secondary analysis where they excluded the trial sites that had low adherence to the ring, because clearly if women didn't insert the ring, it wasn't going to protect them. So excluding these sites from the results meant that the actual overall effectiveness was shown to be higher at 37%. But where it gets very interesting is when we see the large differences in efficacy among women of different ages. Aspire showed that the ring reduced HIV risk by 61% in women older than age 25. And in women older than age 21, it showed that HIV risk was cut by more than half, 56%. This was supported by a trend in the ring study that also showed higher efficacy for women in that age group. In addition, women older than 21 appeared to have used the ring most consistently, which may help explain why protection was higher for them. Now, little to no protection was seen in either study among women ages 18 to 21. This is important because it's exactly this group of adolescent girls and young women that we are collectively concerned about and for whom we need urgent solutions. IPM and MTN are both working now to understand how the use of the ring and biological and other factors may have influenced different levels of protection by age. For example, we know that young women's bodies have more cells at risk around the cervix than older women, but we need more research to establish if this was one of the key reasons, and we'll come back to this point later with other possibilities for this. This research has raised many questions. A few of the ones I'm going to explore with you today, with no promises they will be answered, that will be an ongoing effort. I've listed a few here. I've been ridiculously ambitious here to try to squeeze all of this into one presentation, so please bear with me. I think to really understand the ring research, it's helpful to know the background to microbicide research and its history as a women's health movement. So just quickly, I want to recap how we got here. Campaigning efforts by many groups all over the world led to funding and the first generation of studies looking at existing products which were in the form of gels, daily gels. As you would expect with initial studies, there were ups and downs, and as early as 2002, many scientists in the microbicide field started to argue that gels would not be the answer. The Caprisa 004 study was the first proof of concept that a daily gel applied with an applicator could provide protection, and that was in 2010, but it showed a modest level of protection, again, 39%. This, together with the mixed results from oral PrEP trials in women in Africa, led to an increasing feeling that what was needed was something that would not have the adherence problems gels and pills face. Of course, we now may want to revisit the daily gel with what we know now. Why a vaginal ring? This is why the vaginal ring is seen as an exciting new option. As we know, the existing methods of HIV prevention, amazing though they are in many contexts, are not ideal for all women and indeed are quite a few in number. Both scientifically and socially, the ring ticks quite a few boxes. If we think about contraception, we have a wealth of evidence that many women don't want to take a systemic option, like an oral drug or a daily pill, and especially this is the case for young women. And more options means more protection overall. And I've included this next slide just to remind us that there's ongoing research into a version of the ring that could deliver contraception at the same time as protection against HIV and, crucially, other STIs, which would be very desirable to many women and highly cost-effective. But let's hear about some of the reactions to the ring results that we saw in February, which I found very interesting. As you might guess, someone who's been working on microbicides advocacy since research into the ring started in 2002, I personally was thrilled to see the modest level of HIV protection. I think it's a remarkable achievement to get to this point within the lifetime of the Millennium Development Goals. This is a completely new drug development delivery mechanism, which was for years dismissed as kitchen sink science and a little sister to HIV vaccines research, with a fraction of the investment that's gone into that. But here in Europe, we didn't see a huge amount of media. We had next to no reporting of this in the media, and the press reaction in the US, however, was mainly positive. What about the community reaction? Well, in Europe, there was quite a bit of negativity or skepticism, mainly around the relevance and need for microbicide research. People were surprised by the positive press reaction in the US, given the low headline figure. And this is an anonymous quote from an HIV advocate in Europe who found the result disappointing. The next one is also from a European advocate who questions whether it's ethical to give women something less than 100% effective. What's important to point out here is that the first large-scale trials of oral PrEP showed a 44% level of protection against HIV, which you could also say is modest. And critically, the 100% effectiveness we're now seeing has only been shown among gay men, a very different population to women biologically at least. So what we see in contrast, however, with the women who were in the trial sites was very, very different, one of jubilation. And this is from women who might understandably have been disappointed at the low effectiveness. So why the mixed reactions? I put up a few possible reasons here, a few of which I'll explore in further slides. I think my point here is that many of these issues about the mixed reaction could have been overcome if prevention advocacy was better resourced, because the community would understand the field better. And this matters because if the community in donor countries are not supportive of research into women's specific needs, their governments certainly won't be. And this research is not sponsored by pharma, it depends on government support. Let's look at why adherence was found to be lower in the younger women in both these studies. As we've seen, the working theory in the field has been that vaginal rings will be easier to adhere to. As both trials were underway, the results from the VOICE study looking at gels and oral prep in women showed very low rates of adherence. So both studies implemented a range of strategies to ensure that they could tell if women were actually using the ring consistently or not. Each month, the women came back to get a new ring, researchers measured the amount of drug left in the ring, and the women with the least amount of drug were the ones who were most protected. This is a quote from a presentation given by Jared Bateson, the principal investigator on the ASPIRE study. And when NTN have looked at this, they realised that the motivation for the young women joining the trial was not access to the ring, but access to other things, not least the state-of-the-art medical health care they would get, including free contraception. Should we have already guessed that this might happen? Maybe. Because, as researchers, we can be a little tunnel vision when it comes to our products, and doctors perhaps sometimes think of the clinic as the answer to everything. But it does point to the fact that for many young women, and this is not really breaking news, HIV is not their top concern. They do not perceive themselves to be at high risk of HIV, but they do perceive themselves to be at risk of pregnancy. And this is where we come to the quote I just showed you, which is a nicely summed up point by Laurie Heisey's reaction to the low adherence reported. Technology alone will never be enough. And I'll come back to this point at the end. So what next for the ring? The good news is that research is going to continue. We'll have what is called open-label extension studies, as we did with PrEP. And with PrEP, as soon as people knew it worked, they adhered to it better, and as a result, hey presto, they were better protected. Although there's still a way to go before the ring is made available, for a number of reasons, some of which are here, it's very nice to know, I think, that women in Africa won't be the last to get it, as all too often happens. So in the interest of time, the next few slides show you some of the stages in the process. I'm not going to go into detail on those, but they give you an idea of what's involved. Now, one of the core principles of ethical conduct of biomedical HIV prevention research is the provision of first access to the product to the participants who took part in that trial. And this is done through an open-label extension, or OLE study, not to be confused with demonstration projects or full-scale product introduction. 2 open-label studies will now hopefully move forward in South Africa. One is HOPE, fully funded by the US National Institutes of Health, and the other is DREAM, which is run by IPM, which is still fundraising. Importantly, in these studies, women will be offered oral PrEP in countries where it is approved. This will give us additional information about women's preferences. And very importantly, more research looking at the preferences of younger women is being planned. The Microbicide Trial Network 034, MTN 034, will look at oral PrEP and the vaginal ring in adolescent women aged 16 to 21. And all participants in that study will use each product for a set period of time and then be able to choose which one they want to continue with. It's hoped that this study will begin early next year. And I know that the UK Medical Research Council would also like to do a similar study in South Africa, which is MDP 401. In the meantime, IPM is moving ahead with plans submitting a dossier of evidence on the ring to the FDA for regulatory approval based on what's known so far. This is a parallel process to country approval, which may move faster given the demand for new HIV prevention options in some countries. So now we come back a little bit to the science of delivery, and I really like this quote by the president of the World Bank, Jim Kim. What I think is happening is we're expecting to deliver not only the tools, but also the delivery systems. So clearly PDPs like IPM, IRV are part of the solution to this because they consider access needs from the very beginning, but much greater resources need to go into thinking around how we use biomedical tools most effectively. And this work shouldn't just be left to physicians to take care of. We need them to focus on the medical science, and we need to work alongside them at every step of the way. So just to give you quickly a comparison of what another introduction of another women's product, let's look very quickly at the history of the tampon, which took 17 years to get to the equivalent of universal access. And this was a commercial product with considerable marketing expertise behind it. If you think about it, young women were not encouraged to use them before sexual debut until recently because of the virginity question. So, the prevention paradigm. We're making progress on increasing the range of HIV prevention options for women. In 2000, at the start of the MDGs, we only had behaviour change in male condoms. We now know that gels and rings work modestly. Obviously, we need to improve that. We have PrEP. We have the equivalent of the contraceptive pill. We have the male circumcision and ART. And implants and injectables are on the horizon. So earlier we said that technology alone will never be enough. But I come across a lot of suspicion around biomedical approaches in HIV prevention. This can be expressed as the danger of over-amplifying the prominence of medicine or over-medicalizing our approach to HIV. But for me, this is like saying in harm reduction terms that we're in danger of depending too much on clean needles and syringes. Harm reduction uses a biomedical tool and places it within a package of initiatives that address the wider needs of people who use injecting drugs. We must do the same with PrEP and vaginal rings and place them within a broader sexual health harm reduction program. I hope this presentation has started to make a case for this. As one of the leading PrEP researchers in Belgium has put it, and this is the quote, it's not just about putting pills in people's mouths or similarly a shot in the arm or a ring in your vagina. We must not view microbicides or vaccines for that matter as purely biomedical approaches to HIV prevention. I think this does them a disservice. New tools for HIV prevention are more catalytic than that, as we've seen with the personal stories from men using PrEP about how it's impacted on how they see themselves. We need a second sexual liberation from HIV. And as an HIV movement, we should be celebrating the huge steps forward that have been made in the past few years, and we should be much more vocal about what this means for all of us. Thank you.
Rebekah, thanks so much. So I'm sure everyone joins me in thanking you. So many questions as you went through that. Wonderful to have the opportunity and quite a bit of time to ask some of these questions. There is a comment in the chat box from Nicholas, whose surname I would mispronounce, Feustel, perhaps? Feustel, sorry, indicating applause, which I'm sure we all share.
That's very sweet.
So I might get the ball rolling here. You mentioned towards the end there, towards the end, about new tools, seeing new tools as catalytic. Mm-hmm. And you said, for example, the response of gay men to use of PrEP and how that changed how they saw themselves or something like that. I can't remember exactly what you said. Could you describe for us, for those of us who don't know what that response was, how they responded and what you mean by catalytic? Okay,
yes, good question. Well, with the case of PrEP and gay men using PrEP, if you've heard a PrEP user speak, they they talk passionately about how it's changed their lives, and this is obviously for some men, that the fear around HIV has been so present for years and years of people's lives, and I think what PrEP enables people to do is to have sex without fear for the first time, and that is hugely liberating, obviously. And what's been really interesting is that you might think that there's this shaming about men who use PrEP because they're just using it to have multiple relationships. What I've heard is that some men have said, actually, I'm actually now for the first time in a monogamous relationship, because before I had such an anxiety level and such a fear that I was in a very strange place. And this is not to say that monogamy is better but for this person, they were saying that they were able to put aside a lot of their issues, and PrEP enabled them to have a healthy sex life, and that freed them up to actually have a meaningful relationship with somebody. And for that person, that was, those people, it was incredibly liberating and life-changing. So we may think, of this as a party drug, but it's much more than this. Is that is really not what this is. It's a liberation that we've seen with the contraceptive pill for women, enabling them to have the sex life they want without the fear of repercussions. When I say catalytic, I'm talking about that, but I'm also talking about, we often talk about, women don't have the negotiation skills to insist on condom use, or male condom use particularly. What we have long thought, and I think this is borne out in the trials, is that the conversation between the partners was a one-off conversation where the woman said, look, I'm in this trial, I'm going to take this, are you okay with that? And then able to use it and no more questions asked. And so it's giving women something that they can say to their partners, look, I want to use this. And it's not accusing them of infidelity at the same time. It's not bringing that into the conversation. It's saying, actually, I want to use this. And that is very transformative process. So I think that's why we see these tools as more than just a medical solution, because they open up that possibility. With PrEP, for example, men are coming into HIV clinics that they wouldn't normally do, and they are getting treated for things, STIs that they wouldn't know they have, and they're able to have counselling that they probably wouldn't. But the positive PrEP hook is something positive that they can access and use. So that's what I tend to mean by that.
Right. That was great. We have a comment and a question from Catherine Dodds, who says, I agree with what Rebekah is saying about the catalytic nature of PrEP. Only a teeny tiny minority of MSMs who might benefit from PrEP can get it now or would even seek it in future. It all depends on their risk perception. And her question is, what kind of risk perception issues do you feel arise in relation to ring technology for women? How might this shift across communities and social contexts?
That's a good question. I mean, with MSM, the reason they can't get it now is not just because they don't perceive themselves at risk of it. There's a huge problem we have with getting PrEP access to people because of, particularly in the UK, just a government refusal to provide it. But it does depend. But I think for the gay community, there's a high level of awareness that they are at risk. For women, it is a little bit different. And as I said, HIV perhaps isn't the foremost risk in people's minds. I think what we want to see is the normalization of ring technology so that it's seen as something that women would naturally have for a range of different issues. So you might have it for hormonal replacement or contraception. So it's not just associated with HIV. It's associated with reproductive health and fertility and things like that. So, of course, there will be, the ring is not going to be for everyone, just as PrEP is not for everyone. There is no doubt that different communities and different social contexts, there will be the ring will fit in, and that's where the work comes in. And this is the point I'm trying to make, is that we're only at the beginning of this work. We need to really have a sort of interdisciplinary approach to how we use the ring and how we get it into existing programming in future. But there clearly is a demand for it, for something that women can use. So we all need to sort of chip into this and bring social science definitely into this equation.
That sort of raises a broader question. Early on in the discussion, Rebekah, in your presentation, you talked about, and I might have the wrong term, prevention literacy or biomedical literacy.
Yeah.
And the way that the community can respond, and how much work that takes.
Yes.
So it to me, in my work, that seems extremely important and interesting. And I wondered if you have any examples of where or how this has been done effectively or well.
I mean, I think there's a lot of good work going on in where the trial sites are. I know AVAC does work in Africa particularly. In Europe, we've not had so much of that, sadly. And, you know, it makes sense in a little way that clinical trials would be where the focus is, and that's where the communities are engaged, where they're learning about what the research looks like and why it's done the way it is, and contributing to the design of that research. And I think, you know, outside of those contexts, we're catching up, really. And that's where I get a little bit concerned that that we're behind. So I think literacy, you know, we've seen a huge, wonderful achievement in HIV is the treatment literacy. I'm a member of the European AIDS treatment group, and I really have pushed and have worked very closely with Gus Cairns and others in EATG over the last couple of years to build a prevention literacy in Europe by having a yearly prevention forum where we invite some of the world's top scientists, and luckily they come and talk with us and, you know, talk through some of the things, you know, that I've alluded to very, very lightly here, some of these really fascinating details about how they do the research and what goes into it and the kinds of things they're learning. And, you know, this is a learning process along the way. So I think there's some great examples of prevention literacy. The global campaign for microbicides was hugely successful in that. And I wish, you know, we still had it, but we still carry on in our own ways. But yes, I think the prevention funding overall is very low, as you know, and advocacy for HIV prevention is virtually not funded at all. So we rely on our friends in treatment advocacy to support us. So it's an ongoing effort.
I wanted to ask, I'm not sure how familiar people are with the concept of harm reduction and how it relates to the HIV field. And I wondered if that was something you could spell out a little bit more. I'm familiar with it, particularly with relation to drug use or alcohol. And it would be interesting for me to know more about how it applies within an HIV prevention framework.
Harm reduction in HIV is just about, I mean, yes, the wider harm reduction is always been there with people who use drugs to prevent them coming to harm by using drugs. So, and HIV is no different. So it's just added into that mix of things that you're put at risk of through that practice. And so the whole principle of harm reduction is to meet people where they are. And it's not to lecture them and tell them to change their behaviour. It's to meet their needs where they are and say, if you're going to inject, just use a clean needle so you reduce your risk of HIV. I mean, there's a whole other range of things that go alongside that. I mean, there's the opiate substitution therapies, and there's clean injecting rooms, places where people can go. It's about sort of not penalising and criminalising people, but giving them tools to stay at least HIV negative in the HIV context. Now, for me, that has a strong parallel with PrEP and these new prevention options, is that we're not asking people to change their behaviour. I think behaviour change is very limited in what it can achieve. And why should we make people change their behaviour, actually? You know, okay, we want them to be healthy, and we don't want them to acquire HIV because that would be a negative thing for them. And, you know, from a public health point of view, you also don't want them to acquire HIV. So what you're doing is you're saying, okay, you might not be able to change your behaviour, you might, but this will prevent you actually getting HIV. And so I see harm reduction as a pro-human rights approach, anti-criminalisation approach that we can learn a lot from. And I really do support people who say, look, harm reduction is underfunded and under attack. We do need to make sure that people don't latch on to other new things and think those are better than what we can give already. Because if an injecting drug user can get harm reduction services, you know, that works. There's clear evidence that that works. You don't need to throw that away and start with PrEP. What you might want to do is introduce PrEP into that for the people who still find that they want PrEP as well. And what we know with PrEP, and I think we will see this with microbicides of all kinds, is that when people know that they are at risk, and when they self-refer, they come forward and they say, look, I know I'm doing this stuff, and I know I'm at risk, and I want to have something else. And let's start with the demand there, the unmet need for these products, and let's start with that. That's a human rights argument. So I don't know if that answers your question.
No, I think it also, from our point of view, brings us very close to Strive's agenda, and the way we look at a structural approach, which is very much about start where people are. And
yes, and I don't see structural approaches and biomedical approaches and behavioural approaches as being distinct entities.
Right.
I think you cannot put something into one category. If it is in the category, it's clearly not supposed to be. They need to all be structural, all behavioural, and all biomedical. Otherwise, that's what's meant by combination prevention, in my mind, at least.
Right. We do have another question now that's come up on the board. Thank you, Angelo. Thank you for your presentation. One of your slides has a quote from someone in the UK asking why trials among African women always come back with low efficacy. I think it's low adherence, actually, is what I remember. But anyway, can you please say more or clarify this? I ask because I find this accusatory and not really an attempt to answer one of the most important questions. Why do some of these women not use some of those products? And I think this relates very much to some of the other trials, for example, the FACTS trial, some of the similar way that people responded to those results.
Yeah, I mean, from an outside point of view, all you hear is, oh, it was low efficacy again, it was low adherence again. That's all you hear coming out of these trials for women. And I mean, obviously, I have a gender background, and you know, I'm not really that surprised that we have this repeated experience, because we know in terms of equal rights, and it's much more complicated, is what I'm trying to say, to achieve things for women because of the complexity of the social, economic and cultural interplay that we have. So, and the very key thing to say here is that these women in the trials, they were constantly told that this product may not work. It's just an experimental product. We don't know if it's going to protect you. Now, as a woman, you're probably going to say, well, I'm worried. I would like to make sure my fertility is not affected. And, you know, we think very carefully about taking something that you don't know if it works and you don't know what it's going to do to you. So there's the psychology around that. And then, you know, it just really brings home to me that doing research in women is really, we haven't done enough. And that is why when we start to do this, we come across all these new problems and challenges. But I can assure you that a lot of community engagement work was done There's no accusation that wasn't achieved. What we're just finding out is that it's very challenging, and for some women, they're not coming forward to the trial to get access to something for HIV. They're seeing that they're going to get free contraception, they're going to get excellent health care, any other little health niggles they have worries about, they can ask. That's the attraction for coming through in these trials, particularly for young women. And we need to do more research to unpack the data that was collected in these trials to find out more about what exactly that meant. I think there's going to be a wealth of information coming out which will explain why. But for me, that's why things like the Global Campaign and AVAC's work and all the work that community work has done is so critical, because it will flag up for researchers in advance what these issues are likely to be. And unfortunately, that part of the picture is the bit that's most likely to fall off the funding list, the shopping list that they go to donors with. It's the thing that's seen as, let's just find out whether this works or not. Then we'll deal with the issues. Well, with women, you can't separate the two. You can't just find out whether something works and then go, okay. So there's a huge amount of work to do, and I do think that's very important.
Great. Thank you. I see we have another question from someone from Strive, Kirsten Stobanal. On this note, looking at biomedical versus combination prevention, she says, I'm curious to hear more about why perhaps the media attention to the findings from the more recent studies were framed positively in the US and reflected on more negatively in Europe. Were the criticisms coming from a place of concern around an over-reliance on biomedical solutions in general, perhaps?
I think it's two things. One practical and one to do with how we think as Europeans. I think, when I started working with the Global Campaign in Europe, I quickly realised that the dominant narrative in Europe is that any research on Africans is unethical. It's seen as a guinea pig thing. And people are very sensitive to this idea that we shouldn't be doing it. Of course, because if we need to understand something, we need to do the research in the very communities that are most at risk. So I don't agree with that. I think that there is a scepticism around biomedical approaches, yes, perhaps in Europe. But, I mean, from a very, when we were working on this, the Global Campaign finished work in Europe in 2009, so there's been very, very little. Nobody wants to fund this work. So there's been very little. As I said, we've tried in European AIDS Treatment Group to do some of this. But from a very practical point of view, the researchers are based in the US, and they put out their press work and worked with partners in the US to get this media coverage. Now, because of the funding, the financial crisis, researchers have pulled out of funding advocacy in Europe, and that means that they don't collaborate with partners in UK, Germany, France, Belgium, Netherlands, which 10 years ago would have come out with positive press because those relationships were there. And unfortunately, this is just a side effect of the financial crisis that because researchers want to obviously want to focus on the most important thing they have to do, they've had to cut back on advocacy in Europe. And I think this is one of the side effects, that we don't get any press on this issue because there's not seemed to be any community interest, or also perhaps the papers don't have HRE specialists anymore because of the financial crisis. So I think there's a lot of issues that can be put at that door, and I put it in because I find that quite interesting, but just a personal reflection maybe.
Oh, that is interesting. Does anyone who's asked a question have any further comment to make, or any follow-on question? Any other questions? I have one more. There were so many things you mentioned that I wanted to follow up on. One was, you said something about the demand for new prevention options in some countries. I wondered if you could explain which countries, what kind of demand, and all of that.
I'm talking about countries where there is such a high, it's endemic, HIV is endemic, and there's the South African government, for example, recognises that they have to act, and I think that they will. In South Africa, the speed with which products are made available may be quicker than they are in the north, because it's just clearly recognised that we've got to do something particularly for women. So that's sort of what I was alluding to there, and it will depend on cultural and country-specific contexts.
Is there anything else, Rebekah, that you'd like to enlarge on? We have a comment from April Murphy thanking you.
Okay.
Anything else you'd like to enlarge on or bring attention to?
Yes, so April's posed a question that we could look at more. She says, in multiple contexts, cultural acceptance and women's decision-making power are key components of life in general and health-related behaviour. Are there strategies to engage community leaders in the use and benefits of the ring? Well, I certainly hope so. I'm sure there is. I very much doubt there wouldn't be. I think, it's going to be things like religious leaders who accept this. And interestingly enough, IPM took the ring to the Pope at one point and had it blessed. Because obviously if the Catholic Church comes out against a contraceptive, not even a contraceptive, just an HIV ring, you're off to a non-starter really, aren't you? So a key part of access, and I think this is critical that we do start to see funding going into this part of the picture, to really communicate the benefits of the ring to key gatekeepers, opinion leaders in the community. It has to fit within their narratives and their issues, and it mustn't be undermined. We saw with the female condom what happened. I mean, a potentially, at the time, incredibly useful tool just sat in factories because everyone just dismissed it. And so the gatekeepers and the healthcare workers that could have pushed it out just said this isn't for our women. So we've got a huge amount of work to do now. Now we know the ring works, and it can play a role in countries with high HIV prevalence. I mean, I don't know if you saw the incidence level on the early slide. They're seeing 4% incidence, 3% incidence in these trial sites. These women are at very high risk of HIV, don't think that they are, but they are. And so we really, that tells us everything, doesn't it? We need to really focus on those communities. Could the use of the ring in younger women lead to lapse in preventive measures for STIs? I don't think so, because I think, as we've seen with PrEP, what you have with PrEP is that men come forward to get PrEP, and if they should be medically supervised. They shouldn't be taking, they shouldn't, ideally, should not have to take tablets that they've sourced abroad, but should be getting through the health system. That gives the opportunity for them to be screened for STIs, including asymptomatic STIs, and treated for those STIs. And I think the same is with the ring that you provide. By introducing the ring, you're giving additional opportunities for people to receive treatment and prevention across the board for STIs as well. So she goes on to say condom use is still not commonplace. So I think the fear is that condom use will go down because we're introducing a new method. Actually, we know in the African community condom use is low anyway. That's nothing to do with PrEP. It has been low for years. So when you replace no condom use with PrEP use, you're going to get better HIV prevention. And that's the key thing. We don't necessarily need everyone to be using condoms. What we just need is HIV to be going down. How they get there, to me, is less important. I know that condoms prevent other STIs, and it's critical. So I'm not saying that for every woman the ring is better than a condom. What we're saying, as you do with hormone reduction, use a condom, but if that doesn't work for you or is not appropriate for you, use the next best thing, which might be a vaginal ring. It won't protect you against all STIs at the moment, but it will protect you against HIV, and that is the most serious STI we have really for women of reproductive age at the moment. So that's sort of what I say, that I don't think we need to, where women are not using condoms anyway, they just don't use condoms a lot, particularly married women, particularly younger women. It's just not going to happen. So the fear that they're going to stop using condoms is unfounded. They're not using anything. We need something.
In that conversation, I think it's also important to look at sex workers in terms of condoms, and I've recently been challenged, as I think you were too, Rebekah, at the same meeting, about the assumption that PrEP is a great solution for sex workers, whereas for many people it seems important to keep focusing on condoms rather.
I think if condoms work for people, there is no need to disrupt that. What we're talking about is introducing something where they're not being used. And I really take the point that PrEP can appear threatening to people who use drugs, the communities of people who use drugs and communities of sex workers, because they fear that governments will seize on this as a potentially easier, although I don't think it would be, it certainly wouldn't be cheaper than what they're doing already. But I can understand where that anxiety is coming from, because the potential to criminalise people is great. But what we're talking about is, I don't think anyone is saying the vaginal ring is for every woman. Women come in multiple sizes and shapes and of different. They're injecting drug users. They're partners of people living with HIV. They are sex workers. When we say women, we're talking about a big, obviously.
Yes, it's a huge group.
But I think what we're talking about here is women in highly endemic settings, where it's something you're going to come across as a woman who is married or in a relationship of any kind who is not a sex worker. So that's a very different approach. And I just don't think that governments are going to want, we're not seeing much excitement from governments jumping up and down and going, we're going to implement PrEP. I don't see that happening. But I don't think they're going to go for it. And I absolutely support, question marks around that. But we just have to keep saying, no, that's not. If you've got harm reduction and you've got sex working community saying we have what we need, why would you introduce something else?
Right.
This is for people.
I want to make sure we give a little more time. I've used up too much of the time. I see that there's a question from Jane Shepherd. Was the design of the ring tested in focus groups before the trial, in these where it was trialled? If not, has this been a consideration that will be addressed in future?
Well, the design, the ring has gone through many, many, many studies, small studies before it's got to this point. And at each stage, acceptability has been looked at, because from IPM's point of view, they're not going to want to develop something and spend millions of dollars developing something people are not going to use. They've learned that lesson from female condom and other things. So from the beginning, IPM, and this is a benefit of having a product development partnership that is not profit-driven, but clearly access-driven, is to, as you go along, see how people react to it. And so a phase 1 study would be just in a few women, 20, 30 women. And many, it's not probably been published yet, but there is clear acceptability of the ring. It's an existing technology that is used by many women for contraception, but also hormonal replacement. So there's good data from that people find it doesn't disrupt sex. There have been a few question marks about whether men can feel it sometimes. So as I say, for those people it might not be great. It just depends. One size doesn't fit all. But the key thing to say is that we haven't left communities to the end. There's been a lot of thought that's gone into making sure this is compared to a gel, the acceptability around the gel was that it was a bit messy sometimes, and so a lot of thought's gone into making better formulations that are, because we recognise that what we've seen with the condom is, oh, great, 97% effective, but people sometimes don't want to use the condom. So there's no point in us bringing another thing into the field that is 97% effective, but people don't want to use it. What would be better is something that people love to use already, maybe like a lube or something that they don't, even know it's there, and have partial protective, because that actually, the equation works out just the same. If the condom is in the drawer, it's not doing anything.
Right.
So yes, that is definitely considered.
Great.
I think Nick would like to ask.
Nicholas wants to ask a question, and there's also a question from Harriet, I think. So if you want, Nicholas, if you'd like to unmute yourself, star 7.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Hey. So this is Nicholas Feustel. I'm a gay man from Germany and a PrEP advocate. And so vaginal prevention is not my area of expertise, but I'd like to understand better the acceptability and usability of vaginal rings. And Rebekah, you already talked a little bit about this, so I'd like to know vaginal rings for contraception, how widely used they are. And then what you said about, and as a gay man I can relate to that it takes oral PrEP takes away the fear, and that the fear of HIV has always been part of my sexual life as a gay man. But when you said that the women in the studies didn't actually feel at risk of HIV, I was wondering if it would make sense now to really focus on multi-purpose rings that combine contraception and HIV prevention, if those might have a better acceptability, because women might just think, oh yeah, I'd like to use the vaginal ring for contraception anyway.
Yes.
But then what you said about the Pope blessing the HIV vaginal ring, of course, that makes me wonder, but he probably wouldn't bless a ring that's also a contraceptive ring.
Good point. Okay, well, I hope I remember everything you asked there. There was a lot of questions in one. But thanks for supporting some of my comments. So on the acceptability to use, you asked about a contraceptive ring. I don't know. I'm not an expert on the contraceptive ring. I mean, no, it's not that popular in the UK, because when you go and ask for it, I've done this myself, they say, oh, I don't think it's really for you, or, it's this health provider sort of bias that you get. So it's not the top method of choice in the UK. I don't know about other countries. But women are looking for something that's long-acting and discreet. And the ring certainly is that. And it could be up to 3 months. So, the longer acting it is in contraception, the better. And we know that in many sub-Saharan African countries, women's preference is for Depo-Prevail, which is an injection for 3 months. It makes, your contraception one shot for 3 months. And that, I think that's where the field wants to go with injectable PrEP, which could be interesting. And we need to be careful that HIV protection, though, and contraception are compatible. There's a study looking at that called ECHO, to be sure that the two are not interfering with one another. And that's why a vaginal product, the beauty of a vaginal product is it's giving you the ARV drug in a very low dose at the site of infection. So you're going to have very low side effects. And that's another critical thing that women have consistently said they want, obviously, is low side effects. So there's a lot of research in the women's health sector that goes to support this method. Now, what I think would have been interesting is if these studies had been done in serodiscordant couples. As you know, some of the PrEP studies with the best results were done in serodiscordant couples, where one partner knows that they are at very, much higher risk of HIV because their partner is living with HIV. If we'd done these studies in those kind of contexts, we might have seen a much higher efficacy. And as I've tried to point out, where the adherence was low is where the result was low. Where people used the ring, they didn't take it out, they had much better protection. So the more, if you're going to take it out, then you immediately, it's very unforgiving, unfortunately, and you lose protection as soon as you take it out. It has to be in sight. So did I answer everything.
Yeah, and can you remind me of the timeline of the combination products?
The
and HIV.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, all the next few studies will only look at HIV-only rings. Is that right?
Well, the Population Council have an ongoing program looking at MPTs, multi-prevention technologies, which are rings that can deliver contraception, HIV, and STIs together. So as far as I understand it, that research is very much ongoing, and IPM also have a contraceptive Dapivirine ring. They also have a combination ring which will combine Dapivirine with Maraviroc. So the only limit on this is funding. This is not seen as the most pressing global issue right now, unfortunately, whether or not it should be. So much more research could be happening that has very interesting potential.
But perhaps you could read out, Rebekah, that last comment there about
from Anna.
Yeah. And also there was a question from Henrietta or Harriet about sex workers, which I think you might have addressed already. But if you could just comment on that last one there.
Okay.
And then we can close.
Yeah, I mean, just quickly on the sex workers, some sex workers might find the ring hugely beneficial. And I think as a matter of, we shouldn't restrict rings and PrEP to anybody that wants them. They should be able to have access. But there's a difference between that and prioritising something as the main prevention option for this group of people as a public health approach. And those two things shouldn't be confused. Anna says, I agree with you that many women prefer long-acting contraception. I think African women like Depo because it is long-lasting and would welcome greater access to more long-lasting alternatives to Depo. The ring, the contraceptive ring, she says, is pretty popular in the US. What we need are more alternatives, including multi-prevention tools. It's not a matter of needing one best tool, but needing a range of choices. So I agree with that, Anna.
That's a great note to come to the end on, I suspect, yeah.
Yeah, great questions. Thank you, everybody.
Rebekah, thank you so much, and thanks also to AVAC for co-hosting this webinar, and to everyone else who joined in.